Customer threw $1 at me and said that's all you're worth. I owned his favorite restaurant. What if a waitress, humiliated by a cruel customer and betrayed by her sister, finally decides to take control of her life? Hey, my name is Isabella. The dollar bill hit my apron and fluttered to the greasy floor of the diner, followed by his words, sharp as a slap. That's all you're worth. The man's sneer lingered in the air, his buddies chuckling as they swaggered out the door. I stood frozen, the weight of every eye in the room pressing into me. My cheeks burned, not just from the insult, but from the laughter that followed, especially hers. My sister Maria sat in the corner booth, her giggle slicing deeper than his words ever could. I never thought she'd betray me like that, not in front of everyone, not when I was already breaking under the weight of this job. I was Isabella, the girl who'd been serving coffee and eggs at this rundown diner for 3 years, smiling through spilled drinks and complaints about cold fries. I was used to rude customers, but this was different. His words weren't just an attack, they were a mirror, reflecting every doubt I'd ever had about myself. And Maria's laughter. That was the crack in the glass, the moment I realized how much deeper her betrayal ran. She wasn't just laughing at the moment, she was laughing at me, at the life I'd been scraping by in, at the dreams I'd whispered to her in confidence, now scattered like that crumpled dollar on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling. The diner was quieter now, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation fading into a dull buzz. I could feel the pity in the room, the unspoken judgment from the regulars who knew me as the nice one. But inside, I was screaming. Why did I stay here, letting people like him walk all over me? Why did I let Maria's betrayal sting so much? She was my sister, my confidant, the one who knew how much I hated this place, how much I wanted more. Yet there she was, laughing like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't understand. As I stuffed the dollar into my apron, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about that man or his cruel words. It was about every moment that led to this one, the late nights scrubbing tables, the dreams I'd shoved aside, the way I'd let people, even Maria, make me feel small. I had a choice. I could keep my head down, swallow the humiliation, and let it define me. Or I could fight back, not with words or fists, but with something bigger, something that would prove I was worth more than $1, more than this diner, more than the life I'd been living. I didn't know how it would happen, or what it would cost me, but standing there, with the weight of that dollar in my pocket and Maria's laughter still ringing in my ears, one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again. I just didn't know if I'd have the courage to change it, or if I'd stay silent, letting this moment swallow me whole. Will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I wiped down the counter, the dollar still crumpled in my apron pocket like a bruise that wouldn't fade. It had been 3 days since that man's words, "That's all you're worth," and Maria's laughter had seared themselves into me. I could still see her in that corner booth, her eyes glinting with something I didn't recognize, something that felt like betrayal dressed up as amusement. I kept replaying it, trying to understand why her laugh hurt more than his insult. She was my sister, my safe harbor, the one who'd promised we'd get out of this small town together. But that moment wasn't the first crack in our bond, it was just the loudest. I thought back to the smaller betrayals, the ones I'd brushed off over the years because that's what you do with family. Like the time Maria forgot to tell me about the scholarship application she'd submitted for herself, the one we'd planned to apply for together. I'd found the acceptance letter tucked under her bed, her name in bold print, while I was still working doubles to save for community, college, or the way she'd roll her eyes when I talked about opening my own restaurant someday, dismissing it as a cute dream while she chased her own ambitions. Those moments had piled up, each one a tiny cut, leaving scars I hadn't noticed, until they started to ache. I leaned against the counter. The diner empty now, except for the faint smell of burnt coffee and grease. I was alone with my thoughts, and they were louder than ever. Why had I let these slights slide? Why had I convinced myself Maria's actions were just her being practical or busy? Maybe because admitting the truth that my own sister saw me as less than would mean facing how little I valued myself. I'd spent years telling myself I was fine, that this job, this life, was temporary, but the truth was, I'd let it become my reality. And Maria's laughter that day had exposed it all. I thought about confronting her, asking why she'd laughed, why she'd let me stand there, humiliated without saying a word. But the idea made my stomach twist. What if she confirmed what I feared, that she didn't respect me, that she thought I deserved to be stuck here? The thought was paralyzing, yet it stirred something else. A quiet anger, not just at her, but at myself. I'd been burying these wounds for so long, pretending they didn't exist, that I'd forgotten how to fight for myself. As I locked up the diner that night, the cold air biting my face, I felt the weight of those hidden betrayals pressing down on me. I could keep ignoring them, let them fester, like always. Or I could face them, dig into the pain, and figure out what it meant about me, about Maria, about the life I'd been living. But could I confront those hidden wounds, or would they remain buried forever? The diner's clock ticked past midnight, and I was still scrubbing the same spot on the counter, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind churned. That dollar bill, still in my apron from days ago, felt like it was burning a hole through me. Maria's laughter, the customer's sneer. The weight of all those quiet betrayals they'd been looping in my head, louder each night. I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep letting life happen to me. I wasn't just tired of the diner or the insults or even Maria's subtle betrayals. I was tired of feeling like I didn't matter, like I was invisible in my own story. That night, under the flickering fluorescent lights, I made a decision. I was done being passive. It was time to take control. It started with a memory. Years ago, I'd told Maria about my dream to own a restaurant, not just any place, but one where people felt seen, valued, where the food told a story. She'd smiled then, but her eyes had said, "Good luck with that." I'd buried that dream under years of double shifts and self-doubt, but now it clawed its way back. What if I could make it real? What if I could prove to Maria, to that customer, to myself, that I was worth more than a crumpled dollar? The idea felt reckless, impossible even, but it was a spark. And I wasn't ready to let it die. I pulled out a notebook from under the counter. One I used for jotting down orders, and started writing. Not a plan yet, just fragments, ideas for a menu, a name, a feeling I wanted my place to have. Isabella's, I wrote, then scratched it out. Too obvious. The worthy table. I liked that. It felt like a promise, not just to customers, but to myself. But dreaming was one thing, doing was another. I had no money, no business experience, just a high school diploma and a stubborn streak. Still, I wrote until my hand cramped, each word a small rebellion against the life I'd been stuck in. The next day, I called in sick, first time in 3 years. I spent the morning at the library, reading about small business loans, restaurant management, anything I could find. My heart raced with every page, not just from excitement, but from fear. What if I failed? What if Maria laughed again, or worse, pitied me? What if that customer was right, and this was all I was worth? But the fear wasn't enough to stop me anymore. I'd spent too long letting it win. As I left the library, clutching a stack of printed articles, I felt a shift. This wasn't just about a restaurant, it was about reclaiming my life, proving I could be more than the girl who picked up dollar bills off the floor. But could I find the courage to change everything? Or would I hesitate when it mattered most? The notebook was now a mess of scribbled ideas, coffee stains, and dog-eared pages, but it was my lifeline. Every night after closing the diner, I'd sit in my tiny apartment, the glow of a single lamp illuminating my plans. I wasn't just dreaming about the worthy table anymore, I was building it, piece by careful piece. But beneath the menu, ideas and loan calculations, something else was taking shape, a quiet, burning need to confront the people who'd made me feel small. Not with shouts or accusations, but with something undeniable: success. I wanted that customer, Maria, everyone, who'd ever looked down on me, to see what I could become. This wasn't just about a restaurant, it was about rewriting my story on my terms. I started small but strategic. I'd overheard that man, the one who threw the dollar, was a regular at a fancy bistro across town, his favorite spot, he'd bragged once. I looked it up. The Blue Heron, a sleek place with linen napkins and a wine list longer than my diner's menu. It was struggling, though. Online reviews mentioned inconsistent service, an outdated menu. I saw an opportunity. If I could own that place, turn it into my vision, I'd make him eat his words every time he walked through the door. The thought sent a thrill through me, sharp and dangerous. Weeks researching, meeting with bank advisors who raised eyebrows at my diner apron and lack of collateral, but I didn't back down. I pitched my idea with a fire I didn't know I had. Talking about community, flavor, a place where no one would feel worthless. One loan officer, a woman with kind eyes, took a chance on me. A small loan, barely enough, but it was a start. I also enrolled in a night class on business management, squeezing it in between shifts. My days blurred into a cycle of work, study, and planning. But every step felt like a brick laid in a foundation no one could tear down. Then there was Maria. I hadn't confronted her about her laughter. Not yet. Part of me wanted to, but another part knew words wouldn't be enough. I wanted her to see me succeed, to feel the weight of her dismissal when I turned it into something extraordinary. So I kept my plans secret, even from her. I'd catch her, eyeing me at family dinners, her questions about my little diner job laced with that same old condescension. I smiled, nodded, and said nothing, letting her think I was still the same Isabella. But inside, I was plotting. As the weeks turned into months, my plan took shape. Secure the loan, buy the Blue Heron, transform it into the worthy table. It was a gamble, one that could leave me with nothing. But as I closed my notebook each night, the question lingered: would I feel victorious when this was over, or would the consequences leave me feeling empty? The day I signed the papers to buy the Blue Heron, my hands shook so hard I could barely hold the pen. It was mine, well, mine and the bank's, with a loan that felt like a mountain. The bistro was a shadow of its former self, with peeling wallpaper and a kitchen that hadn't seen a deep clean in years, but it was a canvas. My canvas. I stood in the empty dining room, picturing the worthy table, warm lighting, tables filled with people laughing, eating dishes I'd poured my heart into. But before I could build that, I had a score to settle. Today was about more than a new beginning. It was about facing the man who'd thrown that dollar and made me feel worthless. I'd learned his name, Richard, a local businessman, always in a pressed suit, always with a smirk. He still came to the Blue Heron, unaware it was now mine. I'd planned this moment carefully. The bistro was still open, limping along until my renovations started next week. I'd kept my name off the paperwork, using a holding company to stay anonymous. He wouldn't know it was me until I was ready. Tonight, he'd reserved his usual table, and I was ready to serve him one last time, not as a waitress, but as the owner. I wore a simple black dress, my apron swapped for confidence I'd been building for months. When Richard walked in, his usual entourage trailing, I felt my pulse spike. His eyes slid over me, no recognition, just a nod as he sat down. I approached his table, menu in hand, and smiled. "Welcome to the Blue Heron," I said, my voice steady. "I'm Isabella, the new owner." His smirk faltered, just for a second, as he registered my name. I saw the flicker of confusion, then dismissal. He didn't remember the diner, the dollar, the girl he'd humiliated. But he would. I served his table myself, every move deliberate. The food was the old menu, nothing special, yet but I made sure his experience was flawless. Perfect service, perfect timing. When I brought the bill, I slipped a single dollar onto the table, folded neatly under his wine glass. "A tip," I said softly, locking eyes with him. "From someone you once said, it's all they're worth." His face changed, recognition dawning, then something else, embarrassment, maybe even shame. His friends shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't flinch. "Enjoy your evening," I said, walking away, my heart pounding but my head high. As I retreated to the kitchen, I waited for the rush of victory. I'd done it, faced him, claimed my power. But as the adrenaline faded, a hollow ache crept in. His stunned silence was satisfying, but it didn't erase the years of doubt, the sting of Maria's laughter, or the scars I still carried. Had this moment been enough? Would I feel relieved after this, or would it leave me questioning everything? The kitchen door swung shut behind me, muffling the hum of the Blue Heron's dining room. My heart was still racing from confronting Richard. The dollar I'd placed under his glass, a quiet grenade that had exploded in his stunned silence. I'd pictured this moment for months, imagined it would feel like a weightlifting. Like I'd finally reclaimed something stolen from me. But, as I leaned against the kitchen counter, the clatter of pots and the hiss of the stove filling the air, I felt unsteady. The victory was real, but it was fleeting, and beneath it, a tangle of emotions I hadn't expected began to unravel. I'd expected triumph, maybe even joy, but instead, there was a hollowness. Richard's embarrassed flush and averted eyes had been satisfying, sure, but it didn't erase the memory of that dollar hitting the diner floor. Or the sound of Maria's laughter echoing in my head. I'd thought confronting him would stitch up those wounds, but they were still there, raw and aching. I slid down to sit on the cold tile floor, my black dress creasing, and let myself feel it all, the anger, the pride, the doubt. Had I really changed anything, or was I still that girl in the diner, desperate to prove her worth? The next few days were a blur of work. renovations for the worthy table were starting, and I threw myself into them, picking paint colors, tasting new menu items, meeting with suppliers. But at night, alone in my apartment, the questions crept back. I kept seeing Maria's face, her laughter from that day at the diner mixing with every slight she'd ever dealt me. I hadn't spoken to her since the confrontation with Richard, avoiding her calls, her texts. Part of me wanted to tell her everything about the bistro, the loan, the moment I'd faced him, but another part, the part that still stung, wasn't ready. What if she laughed again? What if she didn't care? I started to wonder if revenge was the wrong target. Richard was just one man, one moment. The real weight I carried was deep, own self-doubt, the years I'd let others define me, the way I'd let Maria's dismissals chip away at my confidence. Owning the Blue Heron, turning it into the worthy table, was a start, but it wasn't enough. I needed to face the root of my pain, not just its symptoms. Sitting there, surrounded by half-packed boxes of my old life, I realized that true healing might mean confronting, not just Richard, not just Maria, but myself. As I stared at my notebook, now filled with recipes and dreams for the worthy table, I felt a flicker of something new, hope, maybe, or resolve. But the question lingered, heavy and unanswered. Had revenge truly healed my wounds, or was there more healing to be done? The worthy table was coming to life. The walls of the old Blue Heron were now a warm terracotta, the air filled with the scent of fresh herbs and baking bread as my small team tested recipes. Opening night was a week away, and every detail, handwritten menus, mismatched vintage plates, a playlist of soft jazz felt like a piece of me made real. But even as I polished glasses and tweaked the rosemary focaccia, my mind kept drifting to the hollow ache that lingered after confronting Richard. I'd faced him, claimed my power, but the victory hadn't filled the void I'd expected it to. I was starting to see that true empowerment wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving myself right. I'd been avoiding Maria, dodging her texts and letting her voicemails pile up. But one evening, as I sat in the half-finished dining room, I listened to her latest message. Her voice was softer than usual, hesitant. "Isabella, I don't know what's going on with you, but I miss you. Can we talk?" Something in her tone cracked my defenses. I'd been so focused on her betrayal, on her laughter that day in the diner, that I hadn't considered she might be hurting too. I realized I couldn't move forward without facing her, not for revenge, but for closure. I invited her to the bistro the next day, before the chaos of opening prep. When she walked in, her eyes widened at the transformation, the cozy lighting, the chalkboard menu, the life I'd poured into this place. "You did this?" she asked, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. I nodded, bracing for her usual edge, but it didn't come. Instead, she looked small. I told her everything, the dollar, the pain of her laughter, the years of feeling less than in her shadow. For the first time, she didn't interrupt, didn't deflect. "I didn't know," she said quietly. I laughed because I was nervous, not because I thought you were nothing. "I've always been jealous of you, Isabella, your heart, your grit." I didn't know how to say it. Her words didn't erase the hurt, but they shifted something. I saw her not as the sister who'd betrayed me, but as someone flawed, human, struggling like me. And in that moment, I realized empowerment wasn't about holding on to anger or proving a point. It was about letting go of the need for approval, of the weight of others' judgments, of the version of myself I'd outgrown. The worthy table wasn't just a restaurant, it was my declaration that I was enough, not because of what I'd achieved, but because of who I was. As I locked up that night, the dining room glowing softly behind me, I felt lighter. The past still lingered, but it no longer owned me. Was I ready to move forward, or was there still something I needed to let go of? Opening night at the worthy table was a blur of clinking glasses, warm laughter, and the hum of a packed dining room. The air smelled of roasted garlic and fresh basil, and every table glowed under the soft light of mismatched lamps I'd hunted down at flea markets. I moved through the crowd, greeting strangers and regulars alike, my smile genuine for the first time in years. I'd done it, turned a crumbling bistro into a place where people felt seen, where every dish told a story of resilience, of worth. But as I watched a couple share a slice of my lemon thyme tart, their faces lit with joy, I realized the real victory wasn't the restaurant, it was me. After my talk with Maria, something had settled inside me. We weren't fully healed. Of unspoken hurts don't vanish in one conversation, but we were trying. She'd shown up tonight, not as the sister who'd laughed in the diner, but as someone proud, her eyes misty as she hugged me and whispered, "You're incredible, Isabella." I believed her, not because I needed her approval, but because I'd finally found my own. The dollar bill, once a symbol of my shame, was framed behind the bar now, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. I'd even seen Richard in the crowd earlier, his head bowed as he ate my food. He didn't speak to me, and I didn't need him to. His presence was enough proof that my worth wasn't his to define. As the night wound down, I stepped outside. The cool air a balm after the heat of the kitchen. The stars were bright above, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who'd picked up that dollar off the diner floor, who'd let Maria's laughter and her own doubts cage her. That girl was still part of me, but she wasn't my whole story anymore. I'd built something beautiful, not just for others, but for myself, a life where I decided my value, where I chose what to carry and what to let go. I locked the door. Behind me, the sign for the worthy table swaying gently in the breeze. The journey hadn't been easy. Humiliation, betrayal, and self-doubt had nearly broken me. But they'd also shaped me, pushed me to fight for the life I wanted. I was free now, not just from the past, but from the need to prove anything to anyone. I was Isabella, and I was enough. As I walked home, the weight of that truth settled into my bones, a quiet, unshakable peace. The future was mine, and I was ready to live it fully, fiercely, and on my own terms.